Hi, welcome to Dawn's Dirt. Dirt can mean gardening, dirt can mean chickens, dirt can mean milk cows, dirt can mean politics, dirt can mean religion, dirt can mean anything I want it to mean. And so today on this special solo-sode of Dawn's Dirt, I'm actually going to talk about one of the things that means and meant the most to me, tomatoes. Back when I had my farm, I was actually called the tomato lady, and people would always say, "Oh, you're the tomato lady." And yeah, I was known for my tomatoes on my farm. I had a 36,000 square foot greenhouse. I did cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers. I did 20 acres of field crops. I direct marketed them to my customers at farmers markets, and I loved what I did. Yeah, so everything tomato today on this episode. I just want to start off with one funny little story. So my tomatoes were sweeter than most. They tasted like candy, not like cardboard. And I have a couple little nieces, and I would always get my nieces to say, "What's my name?" I would ask them, "What's my name?" And they would say, "Auntie Pretty." And they knew if they called me Auntie Pretty, that I would give them tomatoes, and they loved their tomatoes and they ate them like candy. And the more they called me Auntie Pretty, the more tomatoes I gave them, because yeah, it was like candy, and their mothers thought that that was okay because yeah, tomatoes are healthy, a healthy snack. And so, yeah, I grew about 9 different varieties of tomatoes on my farm, and they tasted like tomato. Customers would come to me all the time and they'd say, "Oh, I don't like tomatoes." And I would say, "Actually, have you had tomatoes before?" First, I would say, "Is it taste or is it texture?" Because if it was a texture thing, I really couldn't help them. But if it was a taste thing, I really could help them. And so they would try my little candy, my little grape tomatoes, and they would go, "Oh, I actually like tomatoes. I actually can handle eating tomatoes." And so, yeah, I was known as the tomato lady, and I miss that. I miss being the tomato lady, but here we are talking on Dawn's Dirt about everything tomatoes. So the first thing I want to talk about is the different types of tomatoes. So there's 2 types of tomatoes. There's indeterminate tomatoes and determinate tomatoes. So indeterminate tomatoes mean they're more of a bush kind of variety. You can get tomatoes that are like a snacker. So they're just really teeny tiny, and you would put them on your patio. And indeterminate varieties is what I grew in my greenhouse. And so they were super, super tall. I used to get my plants. They were seeded in November. I got them in January. I'd start picking tomatoes in March, and I picked right through until the following December. And my tomato plants were 75 feet long by the time I was done. So I pruned my tomato plants up properly. You can prune tomato plants up a string, train them up a string, no shoots, only leaves, only tomatoes. And I pruned them that way on purpose so that I can control my tomato plants, and it kept them stressed out all the time. And yeah, by the time I was done, they were 75 feet long. And so you can prune indeterminate and determinate tomatoes that way. And I know that because the first time I grew tomatoes, it was many, many years ago. My mom was doing bedding out plants in the greenhouse, and she had a few extra tomato plants. And so we just put them in an extra row that we had. And that was the first time I realized, ooh, wow, our greenhouse actually produces and grows really tasty, tasty, tasty tomatoes. And so the next year we purposely planted some and, got bigger and bigger and more into tomatoes until finally I grew more tomatoes than cucumbers and peppers. And so, yeah. Tomato, tomato, tomato. So when you're choosing your tomatoes, you want to choose your tomatoes based on your goals. So what are your goals for your tomato crop that year? Do you want to choose your tomatoes based on flavor, on, canning them, preserving them? Do you want the big beefsteaks? Do you want, little tiny cherry or tiny tomatoes? So you need to decide what your end goal is for your tomatoes. I grew all the varieties. I grew beefsteak, I grew Roma, I grew tomato on the vine, I grew cocktail, I grew grape, I grew cherry, I grew Zebrino. Those were some of my favorite. They had really thick skin, and they were red and white stripes. I grew yellow and orange tomatoes at different points. Yellow and orange tomatoes are actually very low in acid. And so if you've got that acid reflux or acid issues with tomatoes, yellow and orange tomatoes are a great option for you. I had customers, again, they couldn't eat tomatoes, but they could eat those tomatoes because of the lack of acid in them. And so typically they tend to be a little bit sweeter. I love the flavor of an orange tomato. Knowing what your goals are for your tomatoes is really important. So tomatoes also, they grow best in the greenhouse. So I had clients last year that put up little temporary greenhouse structures. They weren't pretty, they weren't fancy, but they got extra heat units to the tomatoes. Tomatoes really like lots and lots of warm heat, but they actually also need very consistent watering. And so, so when you open up your tomatoes, so I always train my tomatoes up a string, and then I prune them. I took all the bottom leaves off and opened them up to the sunshine. And what that did was the sunshine actually made them ripen quicker. And so tomatoes are they're easy to grow. They grew like weeds all over my greenhouse, but they kind of are a bit of a fussier plant in that they need proper nutrients. They need proper sunshine. They like it where they're kind of not battered around and beaten by the wind and the rain and the hail and things like that. Tomatoes like to be watered from the bottom, not from the top. So they are kind of a bit of a fussier plant to grow. But if you can get good tomatoes, if you can kind of do all those things, yeah, you'll have great tomatoes. One thing to remember, and this is a lot of people are really surprised by this, but whenever you have a tomato flower, you have 48 hours to actually pollinate that tomato flower. So if that tomato flower is not pollinated properly within 48 hours, you're not going to get a big full-size tomato. So if any of you are listening and you've ever seen it where you have one full-size tomato on a bracket of tomatoes, and you have one full-size tomato, and then you have these kind of tinier little tomatoes beside it that are just not, they're tomatoes, but they're just not full size. They didn't grow the way they needed to grow or to the size that they needed to grow. And the reason for that is because they were not pollinated properly. And so an unpollinated tomato that didn't pollinate properly, it's usually smaller in size. It goes bad a bit quicker. It doesn't have the shelf life. And so, yeah, pollination on your tomatoes is extremely important. So if you don't have bees, in my greenhouse, I had bees. So bees are a little crazy to talk about in the greenhouse because I bought bees in. So I bought a new hive of bees every 4 weeks. They were 8-week hives, but I needed 2 in my greenhouse. So I alternated 1. And so these bees were not native to Alberta here. And so I bought them in. They did their job. They were worker bees. And then unfortunately I had to destroy them by law when I was done. And so they couldn't kick the queen out, which means they couldn't recolonize or whatever bees do. I'm not a beekeeper. I'm a tomato grower. And so, yeah. I spent thousands of dollars over my many years on bees to pollinate my tomatoes. So let's take that back. See, that's the thing with my coaching now, is I have to take all my principles that I know on a large scale and transfer them back to small spaces like most people have in their backyards. And so with the bees or with the pollination in your backyard space, you can just take your hand and tickle tomato flower to tomato flower to tomato flower. Don't wipe your hand off in between because you want the pollen. You're going to cross pollinate, and the only reason that would be a bad thing is if you were trying to save the seed for that specific variety for the next year. If not, you're just going to get a weird tomato the next year. And so you're just going to take your fingers and you're going to cross pollinate tomato flower to tomato flower to tomato flower to tomato flower. And yeah, that's how you're going to get a good pollination on your tomato plants. And that's how you're going to get big, beautiful, beautiful tomatoes. Do you remember the toilet paper wars of 2020? Are you worried about being prepared in an emergency? Are you tired of being a slave to the corporations we purchase from? It's time to take control. Become ungovernable. Take your food system into your own hands. Hi, I'm Dawn, a coach dedicated to helping you live like grandma used to. Self-reliant, resourceful, and prepared. Whether it's raising chickens, growing a garden, canning your own food, or even milking a cow, I'll teach you how to thrive and survive in the space you have, big or small. We can even potentially make some money off your homestead. Visit Dawn's Dirt today to book your free Jumpstart call. Together, as a team, we can get you self-reliant and ungovernable. We, the people, have the power to take back control. Remember, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. Let's build a better future and a community, one skill set at a time. And so, yeah, there's just different ways to do it. But again, being on a homestead and doing it on a small scale, you sometimes have to just be creative. I know there was a few times when we first started off, or when our hives weren't working, or, different things. One time I can remember we took a leaf blower. And so every day we took a leaf blower and we just blew around the pollen and blew around our tomato plants, because pollination is extremely important in your tomato plants. Let's chat about stressing your tomato plants out. So my tomato plants, they were 75 feet long by the time I was done. I took off all of the suckers, and I took off all of the shoots. And so, what that meant was I was left with one main branch that had leaves, and it had tomato brackets and tomatoes on it. And it was a stem up a string. And so what that does, and then what we would do is we would take off our bottom leaves. So we would start at the bottom of the plant and work our way up, which is how we got so tall. And then we would lower them down, and we had a really specific way of pruning them. But what it would do is it would stress out our tomato plants to the point that they would think they're dying, and a plant that's dying is going to go, "What are you doing to me? I don't like this." And it's going to want to produce more seed, which is your fruit, which is your tomatoes. And so, so that's really important. Is if you find that you've got vegetative tomatoes and they're just growing and growing and growing, and they're vegetative and they're green and they're lush and they're pretty and they're beautiful, but you don't have tomatoes on them, stress your plant out. A couple of years ago, I was at a farmer's market with a beef producer. So she's very good at beef, and I'm very good at vegetables. And so she was chatting with me about her tomato plants that were big and beautiful, but they just had no flowers, no nothing on them. They were just big, beautiful tomato plants, but they just weren't turning red either. And I said, go home. Just rip a bunch of leaves off, stress it out, make it unhappy, make it grumpy, and you'll get red tomatoes. And sure shooting, she went home, she stressed her plant out, and she got tomatoes, and she got tomatoes, and she got more tomatoes, and she got more tomatoes. And so, yeah, it's really important to prune your tomato plants properly. If you need help with that, I can help you with that. But it's really, really important that you prune your tomato plants properly to get good production. Stressing your plant out is, right where it's at. Now, let's chat about blossom end rot for 1 second. So if you've ever seen, you have your tomato and you pick it off, and you get that black spot on the bottom of your tomato, that's called blossom end rot. And most people think there's only one reason for getting blossom end rot, but I'm here today to tell you there's a couple of reasons. And so blossom end rot, most people think it's because of calcium. And a lack of calcium in your tomato plants is one reason for getting blossom end rot. And so if you think it's from calcium, what you can do is you can take and just put some little Tums right at the base of your plant, and then water it in, and that will get you the extra calcium your plants need in order to not get that blossom end rot. A lot of people will try and use eggshells. Eggshells are a great source of calcium, but you really need to grind it down into a fine powder, because little chunks of eggshell are not going to give off the same kind of calcium as the fine dusty powder will. So just a little heads up on that. If you're mixing it into your soil or into your compost, that'll give your compost and your soil some calcium. But calcium is really needed in tomato plants for blossom end rot. The second reason that you get blossom end rot, and this is the one that most people don't know about, is it's because of irregular watering. So when I had my greenhouse, I would send the water sample away. I would get it back. It was hydroponics. So I added the fertilizer, the nutrients. We'll chat about nutrients in just a second here. I added my nutrients to the water and I gave it to my plants. Now my plants I had a weather station outside of my greenhouse, and it measured the sunshine, and it measured the wind speed, and it measured the temperature, and it measured all the things. And so my computer system would actually water the greenhouse based on all of the conditions, and it would water so many milliliters every so many minutes for so many hours, and maybe a shot in the night. It depended on the time of the year. And so it was very specific as to how much water my plants got. Now, once in a while, we had a pump go down or someone would shut the watering system off. I had that a couple of times. And when that happened, it would take a matter of hours and my plants would droop. They would drop and they would droop because it's hydroponics. They were used to water. With my watering system, it was very important how much water they had. And so we would measure how many milliliters went into our plants, and we would actually measure how many milliliters came out of our plants. And we tracked that every day. It was a daily process to track the input of the tomato plants and the output of the tomato plants, we fed them and what they peed out. And so we would use our wastewater actually onto the field crops. And so, that was pretty cool. I had a very efficient, watering system or water use plan on my farm. Water in, fertilizer, the plants would use it, the wastewater out to the field. And so we every drop and every ounce of water on my farm was so important. And so, that's so when we that's where I was going with this. So once in a while, the watering system would get shut off. And when that happened, my plants would droop within a couple of hours. That's why the water was so important. So my plants would droop and they would almost look like they're dying. And I would say to my staff, I'd say, whoop, we're going to have a blossom end rot issue in a couple of weeks. And sure enough, in a couple of weeks, we had a blossom end rot issue. So irregular watering can give you blossom end rot as well. And that's the one thing that most people don't realize. And so the consistent watering of your tomato plants, not too wet, not too dry, but just that sweet spot in between, that's where you want your tomato plants. Otherwise, yes, you could get blossom end rot. And don't water from the top of your plants, water from the bottom. I had a drip system inside the Rockwell cube, inside, the cocoa fiber bag, so that they just got water from the bottom. Because the rows in the greenhouse, sometimes we get a drip from the roof, and anywhere it dripped from the roof, those tomato plants just did not thrive and do very well in the greenhouse. And so, you want to water from the bottom. You want to protect your plants as much as possible. And calcium and irregular watering can cause blossom end rot. Now let's chat nutrients. Let's chat about nutrients. So plants need nutrients to grow, just like we need nutrients to grow. And so just think back to your day. Have you ate today? Probably the answer is yes. Did you eat yesterday? Probably the answer is yes. Last week? Again, probably the answer is yes. And so your tomato plants are heavy feeders. They need lots of nutrients to grow. So calcium, magnesium, iron, copper, nitrogen, all the things your tomato plants need. And so you want to make sure that you are feeding your plants what they want to really get the legs on them to grow and produce fruit. And so you can get that through compost, you can get it through fertilizer, you can get it through different things. But be really mindful of what are you feeding your tomato plants in order to get production, because that's the goal. Why even bother growing tomato plants? They're not, they're not just for pretty. If you want pretty, plant a petunia or a flower, right? Tomatoes are there for food production. And tomatoes were my most popular item at the farmers markets. And so, I miss my tomatoes. I miss the greenhouse, and I miss the potatoes. But, So, another couple of issues that you have is blight. So you can get brown leaves, and there's different botrytis and different things like that. So when you prune a tomato plant, make sure you snap it right off and that it's flush to the stem. Because if you leave a little piece of stem or a little piece of leaf, that little piece will grow mold on it, and that's not healthy for your plants. And so, and you can get different root diseases. diseases and different different blights and different things in your tomatoes. And so give them good, healthy, good water, and give them good nutrients and lots of sunshine, and pollinate them properly. And yeah, that'll help that out. Also space them properly. So again, if you look at your bush tomato that you had growing in your backyard, and you know it's overgrown and it's crazy, but if you get into the center where it's dark and dank and you know a bit rough inside the interior of the big bushy plant that you got going on, that's where you're going to find your diseases and things like that. So make sure you like air it out, prune it out, and space your tomatoes properly. Okay, so another issue that happens is cracking of the tomatoes. And so sometimes I grew one variety of grape tomatoes, and they were like candy. Most growers didn't grow them because they would actually split and they would crack. And I got away with it because I warned my customers. When we had a big rain, it would rain a lot, and so it would get cloudy, and the tomato plants would suck up extra water. This is why regular watering is really important. This was why my overdrain was really important, because on a cloudy day, if we went from a sunny day to a cloudy day, I got cracks in my tomatoes, especially those little grape ones, and they would crack up and then they would go moldy just like that. And so that's why you get cracks in your tomatoes, is because they're just sucking up too much water, and they're overgrowing and they're just splitting open. And so that's what the cracking is from on your tomato plants. And so again, it comes back down to regular watering. And so, yeah, that's really important. So let's chat about harvesting. So I always picked my tomatoes. They were always red when I picked them. I always said to my customers, I said, I picked my tomatoes red. I didn't pick them green and let them ripen. Those big commercial guys, and I've been to the greenhouses, and I love those greenhouses. I respect them. They're great growers. But when you buy tomatoes in a grocery store, especially on Tomato on the Vine or something, I'll tell you what, the first tomato on that bracket, there's usually a clump of 4 or 5 on a bracket. That first tomato might be a deep orange. The second one might be a light orange, but the last 2 might even be green when those tomatoes are picked. And so what that does is it gives those tomatoes more shelf life. It gives them time to go from the greenhouse to the packing facility, to the warehouse, to the grocery store, to the front of the grocery store, to your home. And so by the time you get those tomatoes, they're looking pretty red because they've had time to ripen, because they've been off the plant. But when I picked my tomatoes, we always went hold, and I picked my tomatoes red and not green. Sometimes the last one was a bit of an orange color, but yeah, we picked them red. And so what that does is it just gives your tomato more flavor. So if it's been on the plant longer, it's got time to, take in more sugars and more nutrients and things like that. And yeah, my tomatoes tasted like tomatoes, not like cardboard. I also chose my varieties based on flavor, not on shelf life. Hey friends, on Dawn's Dirt, we get real about growing food, farming, homesteading, living free, and digging into the stuff that actually matters. If you're loving the dirt we're dishing out, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow on your favorite social media platforms. That's how we keep growing this community of badass, soil-covered, chicken-loving, freedom-chasing humans. Like and subscribe to me on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Come be part of the movement. Oh, this was one quick thing. I was thinking, man, I'm missing something. I'm missing something that I really want to tell you that's really important about tomatoes. And here we go. So, black electrical tape was my best friend in the greenhouse. And so what we did with that is when a tomato plant broke, so as long as it had one little string attaching it from one side to the other on that main stem, if it had one little string, we would take our black electrical tape, we would put them together, put the 2 ends together, tape it all up. And basically what it did was it grafted it back together, and we saved our plants. And so if you break a plant and you go, oh shoot, what am I going to do? As long as there is one piece of something holding it together in some way, and you can even try it without. We never used to have great success without, but yeah, put the two pieces back together, tape it up real good, black electrical tape, and yeah, your plants will continue to grow and survive. When I actually had my farm too, we bought our tomato plants in. So they were seeded in November in BC, and they were grafted and pinched. And so what that means is they would actually grow up one rootstock. Kaiser we usually use was a variety. So they would grow up the rootstock, and then they would grow up, call it a cocktail tomato or whatever variety tomato we liked. And they would cut them both off 100% when they were little, teeny tiny little tomato plants. And they would take the top of the cocktail tomato to the rootstock, and they would put them together and graft them. And then they would let them grow up a little bit. And then they pinched them out. So you had one shoot and one main stem. So we actually had two plants out of one in the greenhouse. And so that's how we got them. We got them grafted and pinched. And so, yeah, we did on a 3-foot section in the greenhouse, we did usually 5 plants. So we would always add in one more branch. So about 4 or 5 branches in a 3-foot section. And that way they were all spaced out properly and spaced out nicely so the sunshine could get to them, so that they can ripen them, so that we could control them. And so, yeah, it was quite the process. And so if you ever watched my Instagram page or follow me on Instagram or Facebook, and if you've ever watched any of my videos, I do have pictures of my old tomato plants, and it's quite fascinating. And so check me out there. So with harvesting and preserving, so we'll get into that a little bit. So with harvesting tomatoes, pick them red, don't pick them green. You can pick them green, and don't put them under your bed. Put them out in the sunshine to ripen. So the tomatoes actually need the sunshine to ripen. And so I would sometimes pick, at the end of my season, I would pick buckets and buckets and buckets of green tomatoes, and we would just sort through them once a week, and we would leave them in the greenhouse so that they would turn nice and red. And yeah, that's what we did. We had red tomatoes right through till like Christmas, January, February sometimes, because we picked the end of the season, we picked them green. So what do you do with the tomatoes when you've got too many and you just don't know what to do with them? You can can them. And so you can peel them, you can make salsa with them, you can make pesto sauce with them, tomato soup. But one thing that people don't realize, this is a little tippy trick that you can do. If you have too many red tomatoes and you're just, I don't have time and I don't know what I'm going to do with them, just wash them, pop them in the freezer, and let them freeze. And then you can still pull them out however many weeks later once they're frozen, and you can still make your salsa, and you can still make your pasta sauce, and you can just throw them into your soup, stew, chili. So I used to tell my customers all the time, like, if you have too many tomatoes and they're starting to go sideways, just put them in the freezer and you'll still use them. There is no reason to ever have a tomato go to waste. And so again, I would have customers come to me at the farmer's market and they'd say, I've still got tomatoes. And I said, put those ones in the freezer because they're not going to taste as good. They're a week or two old by then. Put those ones in the freezer, use them in your soup or stew or chili because they're more cooking quality then, and just get fresh ones. And so a lot of customers would do that. They would always just keep into the fresh tomatoes. So yeah, freezing tomatoes is a super easy option, and dehydrating actually is one more option. So we had too many baby tomatoes, too many grape tomatoes. And so we actually cut them in half and we put them in a dehydrator and put, balsamic, or I forget what we all did to them. But yeah, we made them into sun-dried tomatoes, and they were candied tomatoes to start with. And then they were even better candied tomatoes after that. So yeah, really lots and lots of options with your tomatoes. So yeah. So my favorite tomato was probably the Zebrino. I like the Zebrino because of the thick skins, but the cocktail tomato, they were just they taste like tomatoes, but they also had that sweetness of a cherry or a grape. And so they were my absolute favorite tomato to eat. And so if you're checking out tomato varieties and things like that, try a cocktail tomato. And tomatoes are one of the easiest plants that you can grow. So if you're growing a garden this year, I would highly suggest, if you've got a south side facing deck or balcony or west, or something with lots and lots of sunshine, try a few tomato plants. You need a couple, at least 2 or 3, so that you get the cross pollination. But yeah, try some tomato plants. They're super easy. Tomatoes used to grow like weeds in the greenhouse. You know, a tomato would drop, and next thing you know, you've got a tomato plant growing out of like a crack in the concrete. And so they're pretty easy to grow. And yeah, I think for, you know, good food security, I think everyone should grow tomatoes on their back balcony. Just a great idea. Just something to try, something fun, and it's a great way to get your kids involved. And so, yeah. So if you're interested, I had 36,000 square foot of greenhouse. I did 20 acres of garden. I've grown vegetables. I'm 44 years old. I've grown vegetables ever since I was, 4 or 5 years old. So I've got, 40 years of growing experience. And so if you're just starting out and you want to get into vegetable production, send me a message, shoot me a DM, get onto my Instagram, my Facebook, get a hold of me somehow. And, let's jump on a free jumpstart call so that we can get you booked in to get production out of the space that you have. And so this is the whole reason why I'm doing Dawn's Dirt. This is the whole reason why I'm teaching people. This is the whole reason why I'm doing a podcast like this, is I want to help people. I really want to help people get food out of the spaces that they have. So if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And so, yeah. So reach out and send me a DM if you want help growing tomatoes this year. Thanks so much for listening to the show, and we will catch you next time.